Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Williamsburg City Council meeting of January 12th. Mr. Trivett, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Rogers.
Here.
Ms. Ramsey.
Here.
Mayor Pons.
Here.
Vice Mayor Dent.
Here.
Mr. Kern-Shear.
Here.
Yes, we have a new member of council, so welcome. We look forward to having you work with us as a team.
Thanks.
All right, takes us next on the agenda, the minutes you all have in the online and before you, the minutes for December 5th, two meetings there, and December 8th. Is there a motion to approve or amend? Or
I move that we approve the minutes from the December 5th legislative briefing meeting, the work session on the 5th, as well as the business meeting on the December the 8th.
Second.
Mr. Trivett?
Mr. Rogers.
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey.
Aye.
Mayor Pons.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent.
Aye.
Mr. Kern-Shear.
Aye.
Okay. Takes us to matters of special privilege, and today we have Jonathan Gauntz with us today. Join me at the podium. Congratulations on the new baby. So today, we all recognize city employees. His career as knowledge was only paralleled by the productivity many officers, Officer Gauntz, first person who did walking back. When assistance was needed. His efforts to de-escalate situations but remain firm on what the law requires makes him one of Williamsburg Police Department's most valuable assets. In addition to the traditional policing roles, Officer Gauntz has embraced the Neighborhood Resource Officer Program, committing himself to learning his district, getting to know the residents, and assisting them in mitigating situations that he may encounter. Officer Gauntz takes the safety of citizens and the visitors of the city to heart and leads the WPD and DUI arrest once again for 2022. So good work. To expand his ability to combat these efforts of impaired driving, Officer Gauntz applied for and was accepted to the highly competitive Drug Recognition Expert Program. This program has received national acclaim for its success in identifying drug-impaired drivers. Officers trained as DREs are frequently called upon to assist with roadside incidents involving impaired drivers to differentiate between drug-influenced, medical and/or mental disorders. Officer Gauntz completed both the extensive 72-hour classroom sessions and the 40 hours of field certification training, becoming the first DRE officer in the Williamsburg Police Department. Officer Gauntz is an exemplary city employee and is vital to the success of the Williamsburg Police Department. He is hereby recognized for his dedication to excellence in keeping with the best traditions of public service for the city of Williamsburg.
Appreciate the nominee. Thank you all very much.
Short, sweet. We got a certificate somewhere. Okay, next is public hearings. First is PCR, and maybe we'll do both of these together. PCR number 22-021, a request to amend the LB2, LB3, B1, B2, B3, and B4 business districts to remove certain retail uses by right to a use permitted with a special use permit. Mr. Phillips, can we do both of these at the same time, you think?
Yes.
Okay, and then also PCR number 22-022, which is the second part of this request. And so Ms. Griffin's here. Welcome.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. Today, city staff is recommending approval of PCR 22-021. This is a zoning ordinance amendment that would require new vape and smoking shops to obtain a special use permit prior to operating in the city. I'm just going to go through why we're requesting this and where this would take place. First, this amendment would take place in 6 business zoning districts: the LB2, LB3, B1, B2, B3, and B4 districts. The LB1 is our limited business district. It's located off of Penniman Road and also Richmond Road. LB3 is off of Capitol Landing Road. B1 is our downtown business district, and B2 is located on our corridor business district off of Richmond Road, north of New Hope Road, and then our B3 is our Midtown area, and B4 is along Capitol Landing Road, our culinary arts and hospitality area. I'll briefly discuss the different types of uses that we see in our zoning ordinance. First, you have uses by right. These are uses that can be approved administratively. They don't have to have any special approval before the Planning Commission or City Council. And then you have special use permits. And today, we're asking that vape shops and smoke shops be required to have a special use permit before operating in the city. Now, this would not impede any current vape and smoking shops that are already here, only new ones that will come into the city. I will give you a definition of special use permits. This is what our zoning ordinance defines. It is a special use permit is granted for uses that, if not specifically regulated, can have an undue impact or be incompatible with other uses of land within or adjacent to a given zoning district. The City Council can enact standards, controls, limitations, performance criteria, and restrictions to be placed on the uses that will make sure that they are compatible. Also, the special use permit requires the City Council to review certain criteria. The use must be compatible with the neighborhood. It must be compatible to the comprehensive plan. And there are 3 other criteria that City Council must approve in order to have a special use permit for this particular use. Just to give you very quickly the purpose of this, this is not arbitrary, and I'm going to go through and tell you why. First, currently under those 6 zoning districts that I showed you earlier, there are certain uses that are specifically listed. Uses like banks and financial institutions, bakeries, restaurants and offices and museums. There are other uses that fall under this larger umbrella of retail uses. And right now, all of the vape and smoke shops that we have in the city came under retail uses. And this is any retail use outside of those that are specifically named. What we are seeing is an uptick in violations for these types of shops, unlawful signage, lighting, the sale. We're getting complaints about sale of unlawful merchandise. We're getting complaints about sale to underage customers and other complaints about being incompatible with the neighborhood. This next slide here just gives you the zoning districts in which these vape shops are located, the addresses, and then the type of complaint or violation. First, I will say the 1012 Richmond Road, you may not see that. That's because it's new, it's not open yet. So thus far, we would have 4 that are operating, and additional would be 5 when this one comes on board. They are working through their building permit process right now. So we see an increased sign violations, lighting, working without permits in the interior, and putting up structural members that must get building permits. We also have sale to minors. This location is unknown. There was a question at one of these about the substance being sold there. We did find out that that was an unfounded complaint, but the police did have to go out and research that. And then we have a complaint that came in about the new one that's coming, 1012, a letter coming from a person off of Matoaka about being incompatible with the residential neighborhoods. So what this particular amendment will do, it will define vape shops. This is a definition of vape shops, and I will say there was one change to this definition from when this first came out online, and that is about the third line where it says drugstores, grocery stores, and convenience stores. We had or convenience stores, and we've changed that to and. Otherwise, this is the same definition. I'll just read this. A vape shop is defined as a retail establishment that sells cigars, tobacco products such as but not limited to cigars, pipe tobacco, roll your own supplies, herbal and wax vaporizers, glassware and hemp products like CBD, and other e-cigarettes and associated equipment, including but not limited to vape batteries, coils, and e-liquids, drugstores, grocery stores, and convenience stores, the primary purpose of which is to sell goods and services other than those listed above, should not be considered vape or smoke shops, even if the above referenced goods are offered for sale. So this particular amendment would add vape shops as a use required by special use permit and define a vape smoke shop in the ordinance. Again, staff is recommending approval of this amendment in order to protect the health, safety, and general welfare of the public. And also, we believe that because of the nature of the use and what we've seen as just the branding of this type of business, that we continue to get violations and receive complaints. And we feel like that if citizens knew about what was coming to their neighborhood and if city council was able to put restrictions, we would not see those. And so we're therefore recommending a special use permit be required for all new vape and smoke shops. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And if not, I can go right on to the next one.
Okay, any questions for Ms. Griffin?
Well, you answered one of my questions about the four, and then I watching the Planning Commission meeting, you had mentioned that there was one more application that you had received, so that showed up. But also in the Planning Commission, there was a question about whether it felt like it was restricting that business. So it's not restricting those types of businesses, it's just giving council, we can provide more guidance on where these establishments
Yes.
go.
And it really meets the spirit of the special use permit. It says a special use permit is suggested when uses can be incompatible. And we've found that they've been incompatible in several different examples. So we feel that this is not restrictive, but it gives the citizens and city council the opportunity to weigh in on location and the appearance.
And the clarification in the language differentiating drugstores and convenience stores, I think answered a question that also came up in the Planning Commission, so that was helpful to me. Thanks.
So no other questions? You want to go into the next one?
Yes. Okay. This is PCR 22022, again, a zoning text amendment, and here we're suggesting that private clubs and lodges be required by special use permit. This amendment would just take place in the B1 and B3 zoning districts. The B1 zoning districts are in the downtown area off of Lafayette and Scotland, and some off of Richmond Road. And then the B3 is our Midtown area, including the Monticello Shopping Center. The purpose of this request is similar to the first one, but here, private clubs and lodges are not defined in the zoning ordinance. They are allowed currently in the B1 and B3 zoning district. By tradition, by zoning tradition, these particular uses have traditionally been social and fraternal organizations that are not for profit, usually a 501c7. However, that's not particularly defined in the ordinance. And what we have found is that property owners or business owners have been, at least three, have come to the office and have requested to have a private club or lodge for businesses that otherwise are not allowed in the city at all. And this is a loophole where they would be able to come in and operate as a private club or lodge for a use that's not allowed because private club or lodge is not defined. So we are recommending that, I won't go over this again because I just did this, it's the same thing from the other side, but we are recommending that private clubs and lodges be required to have a special use permit. Here's a definition. I won't bore you with reading that, but this is a definition that has been approved by our city attorney, and we feel is appropriate for private clubs or lodges, and it closes that loophole that people have been trying to come in under. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Any additional questions?
Thank you, Ms. Griffin. You mentioned that some organizations have been coming in, I guess, to try to open a private lodge or club. And how have you been able to sort of not approve their application to date?
Yes, so there was one that came that I have knowledge of before I got here. There's been two since I came. One was represented by an attorney. He sat down with myself and Ms. Shelton and understood what we were trying to do with this ordinance, and he has decided to go another route. He still will come before you all, and he's going to request a specific use to be allowed by a special use permit. And the other was just a question, and they no longer pursued it.
So by passing, if we would decide to pass this ordinance, then that would preclude any private clubs or lodges from being able to operate in the city without a special use permit?
That is true. Of course, not current private clubs or lodges, but any new private clubs or lodges. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay, no other questions? Yes, sir, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you so much, Director Gifford, for coming and speaking with us today. I guess I have two, but the first I'll address is on the second proposed item for the B1 and 3 zoning districts and the special use for private clubs. So I have read about in entirely different localities, but within the Commonwealth, inventiveness of getting around the allowability to use recreational marijuana dependent on those clubs being established as private. But the privacy usually comes with something like $1 per year membership. So we are having a change to have private clubs be in the special, in the SU, needing an SUP. But my curiosity is, can we establish minimum guidelines of what it would take to be a member at those clubs so that we aren't ever in the position of having a private club which has received authorization but then can work and be inventive to get around what our statewide guidance is on allowable substance use?
I don't know that question, and that is a question for Mr. Phillips, I would believe, but I'm not sure of that answer.
The test of the proposal before you is whether it's for profit or not for profit. So traditional or even new organizations that qualify as nonprofit organizations, they would fit the definition of private clubs. Anything else that wants to call themselves a private club, they can call themselves a private club all they want to, but if they're there to make a profit, they don't fall within the enabling legislation to get a special use permit.
Okay, thank you. That does answer my question. Thanks very much, Mr. Phillips. The second one was on some of the establishments thus far that we've had. In the first PCR recommendation, you mentioned there were some unlawful signage. And I know there have been periods in which I've driven around town and noticed on some entrance corridors signage which surprised. Could you talk about, without naming any specifics or businesses, how some of that has been in violation with what our ordinance allows in the area?
Yes, we only allow a certain amount of signage, so they have been over the allowable square footage. How the signs has been attached to the building has been in violation. The number of signs have been in violation, and also the lighting associated with the signs have been in violation. And just to let you know, our policy is we go out and speak to the business owner prior to sending any zoning violations. When they come in and get their zoning approval, we also send correspondence to them about getting a sign permit. So some have also not received a sign permit, but unlawfully put the signage up beforehand.
Well, I appreciate the at first non-punitive approach, but I understand. I've certainly been, seen some neon signage that I was surprised to see, and businesses
Just let us
like,
know, and we'll
Well, and I think your office took care of it.
Okay.
But, I think of other examples along entrance corridors, to name one, Chick-fil-A, you don't see the normal red neon signage. They have something that's very muted, which is purposeful for that area.
Yes.
So thank you for providing that examples. Those are my couple questions.
Yes, sir. Mr. Vice Mayor.
What Councilman Rogers spoke to, excuse me, raised another question is, with compliance, do you see that these businesses are slower to comply, or is it average for what you see in your world?
Slower.
Okay, if there's no other questions, we'll go to the public hearing, and I'm going to open the public hearing on both of these agenda items. So if anybody would like to come forward, please do so. State your name and limit your comments to 5 minutes. Okay, seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and come back to council for further discussion and action.
Yeah, I think this gives us a way to manage these uses better than we've had in the past with an SUP, and as Ms. Griffin stated, in one particular instance, closes a loophole. So I think it's the right thing to do, and actually discussing with Mr. Trivett, it compares to what we did with the hotel conversions. It just gives us more guidance, more flexibility to decide where these uses are located within the city.
I echo those comments. I have nothing to add. Thank you.
And I would concur, and I too watched the Planning Commission meeting, and I think a lot was discussed there on some of the violations, the effectiveness of trying to monitor and get those corrected has been difficult at times, and also some of the comments on compatibility with the neighborhoods in particular. So I would be in favor of this as well.
And just briefly, I agree. Of course, this is a change of the code to put something in a special use permit, not a disallowance. And this isn't also to say we haven't already had some level of proliferation. Director, you mentioned 4 establishments plus a 5th that could be coming on board soon. So there is a market there, not one that we're quelling out, but just one that we'd like to have a little bit more purview over.
And that reminds me of a question. The 5th one, would it still be allowed under, even after, if we pass this ordinance, since it's already gone?
It would, because they received their zoning ordinance soon after the advertisement went into for the Planning Commission.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I too agree. I think for the reasons that staff stated, this is agreeable to me. We're not taking away the ability, taking away the right. We're just adding an extra step to the process, and I think that that extra step will make the city a little better. So, is there a motion?
So I move that City Council approve PCR 22-021 and 22-022.
Second.
Mr. Trivett, can you read the roll, please?
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Ms. Kearns here.
Aye.
Okay, it takes us now to reports, and first we have our monthly financial statement. Ms. Dameron, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I want to begin my remarks with some highlights from the general fund revenues. The current real estate taxes are at 50% of budget, which is exactly where we expect to be at this point in time. Personal property taxes trailing budget at 90%, and business personal property is trailing at 94%. This is typical for what we see, though, at this point in time, and we continue to pick up that revenue stream into August and record it to fiscal 23. Recordation taxes are strong at 88% of budget. Room taxes are performing at 51% of budget, and a 10% increase compared to fiscal 22. The current year increased by 177% compared to fiscal 21, but only 10% compared with the same period in fiscal year 2020. And that's because in 2020, we were doing exceptionally well until March. Meal taxes are performing at 48% of budget, an increase of 10% compared to fiscal 22. Compared with fiscal '21, it increased by 79%, and compared to fiscal year 2020, meals tax increased by 12%. Permit and licenses have exceeded budget by almost 62%, primarily due to building permits and to a lesser extent other permits associated with the building permits, such as electrical and mechanical permits. Fines and forfeitures consist of court and parking fees, performing at 38% of the budget, with court fines at 30% of its budget and parking fines at 66% of budget. Other revenues are in line with budget expectations at this point. However, you will note that we've drawn $3.1 million from our fund balance reserves, which is high from what we normally or typically expect at this point in time. There's a reason for that. And in FY22, we reported lost revenue to the Treasury that exceeded ARPA funds that we had received in FY22 by $3.8 million. And as a result of that, we had to book a receivable and record the revenue in fiscal year 2022. So in the current year, we had to reverse that entry and decrease the revenues in the current year so that when we picked that up, we wouldn't be reflecting that revenue stream again. So in truth, in 22, that revenue fell to fund balance, and so now we are pulling it out. And it's okay, if you'll remember when I gave the year-end report for fiscal year 2022, I talked about it appeared on that report that we had a reserve of 50% of operating revenues, and I explained that that wasn't going to stay that way very long because I would in turn be pulling that $3.8 million out once we entered this year, as well as the surplus spending plan for the schools. And so we'll kind of that will follow us through the remainder of the year. So just keep that in mind, and I'll remind everyone of that as well. General fund expenditures are well, one note first, if we didn't have that reversal, we would have reported an increase to the surplus of $572,000. General fund expenditures are operating in line with budget. In the capital improvement fund, sales tax revenues at 38% of budget, which is within our expectations at this point, and it's a 10% increase compared with the same period in fiscal year 2022. In the tourism fund, the historic sales tax is at 44% of budget, which is a 22% increase compared to the same period in fiscal year 2022. The $2 lodging tax is at 47% of the budget and a 1.5% increase compared to fiscal year 2022. I'll also note that compared to fiscal year 2020, the revenue decreased by 11%. And again, this is because in fiscal year 2020, we were doing very well up until March of that year. In the utility fund, water revenues are at 37% of the budget, and sewer revenues are at 33% of the budget. This is in line with what we expect to see at this point in time in the year. Connection, tap, and availability fees have exceeded the budget by a combined $182,000, and our interest earnings have exceeded the budget by $93,000. Operating expenses are in line with the budget at this point in time. And these highlights are the major ones I wanted to draw to your attention in the financial report, but please let me know if you have any questions, and I'll be happy to try and answer them.
Thank you, Ms. Dammer. The council, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Sounds good.
Good. Glad things are in order. All right, takes us now to monthly departmental operating reports. Mr. Privet, who's in the barrel today?
Today it's going to be Public Works. I think Aaron Small is going to represent.
All right. Welcome, Mr. Small.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Today I'd like to highlight, let's see what we got here. At least 5 of our projects that we've got going on to advance from the GIOs from the last kind of cycle. So these are kind of finishing up, and some of these will actually continue into the next cycle as well. Start with the Capitol Landing Road, the Francis Street sidewalk, continue down through the College Woods Circuit, shared use path. Tell you about a little bit about Cedar Grove Cemetery expansion, as well as our Bicentennial Park event pedestals. The first project here, this is Capitol Landing Road. This project is moving along. We've now passed through our environmental reviews and have put this out for public hearing. We're currently waiting now to get together with the utilities so that we can actually get started on some of the undergrounding work, as well as getting ready to start relocating the utilities and start on the water line design, or getting that completed as well so that can start moving. So things are moving along very well. We have figured out some ways to kind of deal with some of the inflation issues that we've experienced on the project due to a lot of the COVID and supply chain problems. But I think we've got a plan to proceed at this point. The next project is also part of Capitol Landing Road, kind of in the same area, is the intersection with Bypass Road and Capitol Landing Road. And this is reconfiguring it such that Bypass Road and the Page Street leg of that intersection will be the main line, and we'll be teeing in Capitol Landing Road to it. It also provides a future extension into the Colonial Williamsburg property for the future development in that area. This will be a signalized intersection. It was determined that that's probably the best use for this due to the traffic volume, the heavier traffic volume on the bypass Route 60 corridor, as opposed to the Capitol Landing Road corridor, which has much lighter traffic. So this would work a lot better than, say, a roundabout at this location. This project we're at 30% design on this, and we're just awaiting for our final environmental review sign-offs before taking it to the public notice phase. And then we'll be catching up to some of the work that we're doing along the roadway, so that hopefully the corridor as well as the intersection can go to construction right around the same time. Our next project, this is our Francis Street brick sidewalk trail project. We're about 50% complete on the construction of this. This is kind of an interesting project because, again, this was designed and was anticipated to go with federal funds. But when we put it out to bid, it was right during the COVID timeframe, and the cost came in extremely high. This was a little over a year ago, or right around a year ago when we put it out to bid. So when the cost came in really high, we had to figure out unique ways of how can we still complete this project without without having to pay so much. So we talked to our folks over in the streets department, and they were able to said, yes, we think we can do this. And we have the ability and the skills, and we could just do the materials. So then we went through and talked to our federal FHWA folks and VDOT, and we're able to get their permission to go ahead and do this work in-house because that requires some extra steps. And so we were able to get that complete and get started, and we took a kind of a little bit of a set aside because it was leaf season. So our streets crew was really busy collecting collecting all the leaves throughout that whole time. And now that we're towards the end of that, we've got one more Christmas tree pickup on Tuesday next week. They'll be back out there on Wednesday and continuing in with a hopeful completion sometime around April is when we're looking at completing it. The next project we have here is the College Woods Circuit, Phase 2. I like to affectionately call this my Berkeley to Berkeley Trail because it goes from Berkeley Middle School down Strawberry Plains Road all the way to the intersection with John Tyler, runs around John Tyler Lane and stops at Berkeley Lane. So from Berkeley to Berkeley. This will be a shared use path, 10 feet wide, asphalt, replace some of the existing sidewalk that's along that stretch so we can follow along existing routes. We will have some tree clearing along the area adjacent to College Woods. But we'll try to minimize that and do very similar to what we did with a little even less impact than we had in and around our Monticello Woods Trail. This project received initial funding of a little over $500,000 towards the $2.2 million total project budget. And so we anticipate starting the design phase of this over the next year and a half. And then we'll be applying for additional federal funds. And now once you've got the initial influx of funds, your foot's in the door, so you have a really good chance of getting the rest of that funded with federal dollars.
Just a quick question on that, Aaron. As you go for additional federal dollars, are we taking in consideration cost increases and?
Yes, it'll take into account that. That's the other nice advantage of actually getting a little bit of the design phase now. We can design it, and that'll actually be able to get that total project budget more refined, so that we'll be able to either cut out things or take out some of the fluff that we included in that initial budget in the first place, because we were just unaware of some things. It also means that when we go for the additional funds, your design is done, so you're much closer to being shovel-ready at that point. So it means they can give you the funds, and you can start pretty quickly, and they really like you to see spending that money as quickly as possible.
So, probably, Mr. Trivett, if worst case scenario that we didn't receive the additional funding, then how do we anticipate a council's decision to push that off, or
That's right.
or expend the money to finish that?
No, that's how we designed the CIP. We're actually working on budget now and talking about how to, even in the budget, make it more clear when there's grant funding and projects are dependent on grant funds, because that will be a decision that would come back to you. So let's say we get to that point, for some reason we're denied the extra money, we would come back to you with the decision of how to solve that problem. What I would do is I would look at the budget, determine if there are projects that we could borrow from to advance this on schedule, and if not, then definitely it would have to come back to council for awareness, if not a decision.
And the other thing that we have to come back to council for is actually during the request for that initial funds requires a resolution from council for support of that project. So our next project is.
I will say though, before we move on, that particular project is a strong contender for funding, just because it is a safe route to school. I mean, it connects directly to Berkeley Middle, so it's an easy grant application to make.
Mm-hmm. The next is our proposed Cedar Grove Cemetery expansion. One of your goals or initiatives was to expand the cemetery so that we could at least extend out an additional 92 or 90 so years. We did a study last year where we showed that our existing land, we've got about 24 years till 2045 is about where we're going to end up before we run out of space on the existing cemetery. We looked at two different alternatives, expanding out the backside of Cedar Grove. One would be a 10-acre approximate expansion, and that would give us about 8,000 additional spaces to get us to 111 years. So that would meet that goal. There's also a second alternative, which would go all the way to the Colonial Parkway, and that would be 26 usable acres, which would take us out for nearly 300 years. So that we would almost be able to double the life of Cedar Grove Cemetery at that point. So we're looking forward to working with William and Mary on that future expansion. The next project is not specifically mentioned, but it's about expanding our parks and that initiative on expanding the use of the parks. This is Bicentennial Park, and what you're seeing here is a layout from the Christmas market that just completed this past season. And it was the location of where the vendors would be located. And you'll notice on the upper left, there's a generators location. And so they were unable to provide power, the necessary power for the vendors, heaters, lighting, all of the lighting that was out there. So, as well as the stage, amplifiers, and a lot of everything that's necessary to provide the power necessary for them to have their function operate. So the generators were done. Our initiative now is to work with Virginia Power and get an electrician on board and to install what I call event pedestals. These would be unobtrusive pedestals that would allow for those electrical connections so that they have a permanent power source. And we can also outfit those to provide water, drinkable water from the water system and the water meter out there. And so that would be something that we could actually make this space much more usable for that. And it would expand not only into the park itself, but also allow us to use Court Street as was used in this case under special event permit. And that's all I have. So any other questions?
No, those are all good projects, and thank you for the update on those. Particularly looking forward to the Capitol Landing Road project and the eventual tie-in to the sports complex site and all that's going to bring. Part of the whole initiative was, as people had visited that site, they could exit out of the site into the city, and I think that's going to be a good economic driver for us. Thank you. Any questions for Aaron?
Thanks, Aaron.
I had a couple. So on the Capitol Landing Road, you mentioned a public hearing on that. We often find that the community doesn't really seem to pay attention to public hearing notices, and are we going to look at different ways for them to be?
Actually, it's very interesting. What we did is there's many different ways to do to get through the process that we call. A true public hearing is the VDOT form of public hearing, which is more of a public information meeting, but they can be very formal. And to me, they're a huge, big deal, costly, expensive deal. What we elected to do on this was to put out notices, let everybody know, and invite them to those public information meetings that we held back in October. That essentially provides the same exact information as provided in those public hearings. And then it gives us the input we need so that we can know what are the major concerns going along there. And we've heard quite a few that we've kind of incorporated into the design. Then what we do is we can post in the paper that we're putting out a willingness to hold a public hearing. So we posted that in the paper. It goes out for about a month, 2 weeks, at least 2 different postings is required by the law. And so we went through that process and we received no comments on it. It's like you said, people don't necessarily know about it. But that's not uncommon in this case. And we're still, my door is wide open to talk about the project. And if there's concerns about it, ran into somebody not that long ago at the State of the City address to talk about some of the things we went over in detail. So, it's one of those things I like to say, it's much easier to access us and look at our designs than it is for a lot of other localities and even VDOT.
So we'll continue to have community outreach.
That's exactly right.
As the project goes along. And then just real quickly on the College Woods, when you talked about a shared use path, that would be the same size as what we now have with Monticello,
Yes.
I assume. And do we anticipate having the lights on
I
College
think we're
Wood, or-
looking at the lighting along there, but that is one of the questions that we need to answer because, again, Strawberry Plains Road is a VDOT road.
Oh, right.
And so that's right on the city line. City line is just actually the edge of the right of way. So some of this trail will actually be in the county technically. But it's one of those things where we've got to decide on what we want to provide as part of it. I suspect it will not be full street lights like we have out on Monticello, but we will probably have more pedestrian level type lighting.
Good. And speaking of VDOT, you said that we got approval from VDOT for the Francis Street sidewalk. Did they provide any funding at all on that?
Yes, it's actually close to, it's 70 to 80% of the funding is from the federal
Oh,
government.
good.
That
Good.
was, I think that's what he was alluding to, was the funding was intended to hire a contractor, and so he had to get approval to shift that money to in-house work instead.
Correct.
Oh, okay. I didn't understand that. Thanks for the clarification. And then last but not least, for Bicentennial Park, when you talk about those
Event pedestals.
event pedestals, I know P3 has used them over time, some different things to bring power in there. And so you're saying it would also be different areas within the park along the paths?
Correct. The intent is basically to install the conduits along the paths or along the edge of Court Street, just on outside, just right at the edge of the right-of-way, so that those could be accessed. And we would control that access. You've probably seen some of these similar pedestals. James City County has quite a few of them out at Chickahominy Riverfront Park for some of their events. Those are bigger pedestals. They've got them at marinas and other places where they're not very obtrusive, and you can get all kinds of sizes so that they're not as big.
And so they wouldn't really be powered until there was a approval given for,
Yes.
for a special event?
Right, and of course, and they can be locked. So we can prevent somebody from just pulling up their camper and plugging in. Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Suddenly there'd be new EV chargers,
Right.
city streets.
That's another initiative.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Well, no questions for me. Thanks so much, Mr.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Small. Mr. Trivett, anything from you?
I'd like to introduce a new employee.
Oh, yeah?
We're excited to announce that I have a new executive assistant, Dusty McKay, who's joining us from the Poquoson City School System. And hopefully, fingers crossed, will be a clerk very soon.
Welcome, Dusty. It's glad to have you aboard.
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Phillips, this is your turn. You want to take the floor? Anything from you?
It's nice to be with you.
It's nice to see you and nice to have you with us. Take there's no report with that. So we have some unfinished business, and that's the consideration and appointment of boards and commissions members. Vice Mayor.
Yes, we do. I move that the city council reappoint Scott Spence and Ken Gross to the ARB for a new term ending on December 31, 2026. Nancy Carter to the Historic Triangle Bicycle Advisory Committee for a new term to end on December 31, 2025. Barbara Dameron to the Middle Peninsula Juvenile Detention Commission for a new term ending December 31, 2026. Connor Sokolowski to the Planning Commission for a new term ending December 31, 2026. And Cash Earhart, Christopher Karachi, Ron Kirkland, Craig Reeves, and Sally Wolf to the Tourism Development Grant Review Committee for new terms ending on December 31, 2024.
Second.
Mr. Trivett, please.
Mr. Rogers.
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey.
Aye.
Mayor Pons.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent.
Aye.
Ms. Kernscher.
Aye.
Another new business, we have announcements of the mayoral appointments and boards and commissions. Mr. Trivett.
Yeah, so, every organizational period, we have to do reappointments to the boards and commissions on which the city council serves. Those are appointments made by the mayor. You guys have negotiated those, and they are now attached to the new council policies and procedures manual. And I would encourage you to take a look at that. It's attached to the agenda now if you'd like to see it. We went through and completely updated everything, so it's completely up to date, including all the references to city code, but it's also completely redesigned, courtesy of Nicole and Micah, as always. And I think it looks really sharp. It's a big vast improvement over what we had, so hopefully that'll be helpful to you. No actions required on this item.
I did take a look at it. It is vastly improved, and so thank you for taking the time to do that. And thank you all for agreeing to serve on the various boards and commissions. And to that, as the city manager says, it is available to the public to see online, and so I would encourage you to take the time to read through it, just for entertainment. So that concludes new business, unless there's something else. I don't think there is. Takes us to open forum, again, which is an opportunity for anybody in the audience to come forward. Not seeing a mad dash. We'll close the open forum. I don't believe we have anything for closed session. Last on the agenda is adjournment. Is there a motion?
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Mr. Rogers.
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey.
Aye.
Mayor Pons.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent.
Aye.
Kernscher.
We adjourn.